Amen.
Go ahead, Kesis. ይቀጥሉ።
ኧረ ግድ የለም ለእርሶ ነው ጸሎት።
ግድ የለም። አይ ዛሬ ታዘዋል እንግዲህ።
እሺ እንደው መቼም ለመታዘዝ። እሺ በስመ አብ ወወልድ ወመንፈስ ቅዱስ አሐዱ አምላክ። አቤቱ ፈጣሪያችን ቸርነት በምሕረት ለዚህ ሰዓት ስላደረስከን እናመሰግናለን። አቤቱ አምላካችን ሆይ ጉባኤ ሐዋርያትን ጉባኤ ነቢያትን የባረክ አምላካችን ጉባኤያችንን ባርክልን። የምንማረውን በሕሊናችን በልቦናችን ጻፍልን። አቡነ ዘበሰማያት
አቡነ ዘበሰማያት ይትቀደስ ስምከ በከመ በሰማይ ከማሁ በምድር ሲሳየነ ዘለለዕለትነ አበሳነ ወጌጋየነ ከመ
ኢየሱስ ክርስቶስ ኃጢአት ሁሉ ዝክር ማይሰራት እግዚአብሔር ይፍታ።
Thank you, Kesis. Good evening, all. Thank you, Deacon Gabra እግዚአብሔር.
Amen. Amen. እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን. Thanks to
joining
God.
us to give a lecture about Saint Matthew and his works, especially his evangelical activities and some references on his martyrdom. So, before going to your lecture, can you tell us about your works in Ethiopic? I know we were in Ethiopia, you work a lot of things, so we need some clarification or some clues about your works.
Okay. Generally, you mean different works or
Different works, then you
different
can go
works.
to your
issue. Okay. Yeah, well, by እግዚአብሔር ጸጋ, the grace of God, he gave me many works to do, a lot of barakat, many blessings, because he said, who will go, who will do, and I was willing, and still am, and so I have a lot of researches that God has given me in many different areas. So I have a lot of linguistic work that I deal with, which I'm one of my principal research is to show that the languages of the world are all interrelated to each other. I gave my first big paper at the 17th International Conference of Ethiopian Studies in Ethiopia at Akake campus. It was called The World of Synonyms, and this is when I show that the Anglo-Saxon language, the Old English, and the Old Ethiopic, the Old Giz, they are related to each other. And so half the paper was dedicated to, and the research half was dedicated to the lexicon and guess and sim, the verbs and the nouns in the Ethiopic and in the Old English to show that they are related. And then the other half of the paper was a kind of thesaurus and grammar, which dealt with the grammar side, so that we can see that, there's a issue within linguistics, which is said that linguistics and philology, which is said that if you only compare lexicon and different words, then it can be there can be accident and there can be chance which come in. So we really need to also compare the grammar in order to say that two languages are correlated with each other. So that's what I did. So I mean, but to give just one or two examples that we can say in brief, for example, our word Burhan, and then we have with Burhan, there are many different forms, like we have from Berha, as in Abraha, and Berha, Berhet, it all means bright, or it means light, but it translates and it is cognate with the word in Anglo-Saxon, Berhet. Berhet in Giz, Berhet in Anglo-Saxon. But the Anglo-Saxon today, that same word Berhet is bright. We have the word Ferhat, okay, from Ferah. So in the Anglo-Saxon, the cognate is fear and fright. So Ferhat, fright, it is the same word, and Ferha and fear, it is the same root. They are cognate cousins. Our word in the Giz, nege. Nege means, it means in the Giz morning, it means tomorrow, but really the original meaning means at dawn, or at dawn, where in the sense of the cognate in the Indo-European or Indo-Germanic, or to use the old term Japhetic, from Japhet or Yafet, the European languages, is the root is our word for today, which is night. And in the Old English, it is nehet. And so this word, it means the word that means the word night in the English means twilight. So in the Giz, it means early in the Anglo-Saxon, it means early in the morning. In the Giz, it means late at night, but the sense of two of them means like the twilight, when it's between light and darkness, either in the morning or in the evening. So that's just to give a sense of of the linguistics. And I'm writing a a grammar, comparative grammar, and also a comparative lexicon with these other works. Yes, Kesis?
There was a sound in background. So thank you for sharing your experience. We appreciate your efforts, especially in Ethiopic. So to use our time properly, let's come to our topic on the case of Saint Matthew.
Amen.
If you need, you can share us. If you have a slide, you can share your slides.
Yes. Did you receive the document?
Yes, I did.
Yes. Okay. This is okay. Kudus Mateos. There is a text that I discovered. And I was working on for some time, until in 2011, Gregorian calendar. I was inspired to go to Ethiopia, and to go and to discover, by God's grace, the land in which Saint Matthew is mentioned within this document. This document, it is called the Vita Sancte Matthaei, or the Life of Saint Matthew. It has various names. Some call it the Acts of Saint Matthew, and various different ways that they label it and they name it. So I gone to Ethiopia, and I discovered I interviewed a number of scholars there in Ethiopia, And they lead me, a few scholars that I interviewed, they lead me to one scholar who they said was the translator of the Gedli Hawariyat, which is the acts of the apostles, or the strivings of the apostles and the martyrdoms of the apostles. That was in Ethiopic. So I went to this scholar whose name is Margita Gabra Yohannes Gabra Mariam, as is shown on the screen. When I interviewed this scholar, he said that he didn't hear anything about Kudus Matthäus, and his translation of the authorized version that we have now in the church printed in Giz and Amharinia, that he is the one, he's the translator and compiler of that. He said he compiled it from many manuscripts in Ethiopia, in Ethiopic, and he translated into Amharinia, into Amharic. And so he said he didn't use any texts that were outside of Ethiopia. So I had the sense that he must know. If anybody will know, he will know. And so again, inspiration from the Holy Spirit and by the wisdom of God come to me to press him. And so I pressed him and I said, you must know. And he think very hard, and then it come on him, and he said, there was once one bishop, and this bishop, he said that Saint Matthew gone to one place in northern Ethiopia. And so I was on the edge of my seat and very engaged in his next words. And so I said, say on. And he said, it was Nadir, he said. As soon as he said Nadir, immediately I know, by the grace of God, by the wisdom of God, that by the inspiration of God and the knowledge that he invested in me, that in studying this data also, that this was the place. And so immediately I asked him where it was, and then he told me it was approximately 14 kilometers from Aksum. And so then I made arrangements, and the very next morning, I didn't wait to go on the bus to Aksum. That would be 2.5 days, and then you have to stop overnight a number of times. One place you have to stop over is Debrecen. And so I booked a flight, and I went immediately there, and I traveled for 4 days in order to, in the whole land of Nadir for 4 days, until finally I came to the church of Saint Matthew, which he originally built. And then I interviewed them at the church there, and this, what we see on the screen now, is the account that I took from the high priest there. I interviewed the high priest, and same way I interviewed the archdeacon. So this is the account of the high priest, what he said. So he said that Saint Matthew came to Ethiopia while 2 terrible enchanters named Zephyr and Zephyr, who had great power and knowledge, lived in that land. These enchanters also had with them dragons, which they sent to Saint Matthew. But when the apostle signed the beasts with his cross, with his physical cross, they became docile like sheep. Meanwhile, the daughter, it said, of the then king had also died and was raised from the dead by the apostle, and seeing these things all the people believed. And so this account, I recorded this account from the high priest, and as he was speaking, this was the first time I hear it. I was familiar with the Latin edition of the Vita Sancta Matthew, the life and martyrdom of Saint Matthew, which is different from the Ethiopic account. And so I immediately know that this was the same Tariq, the same history, you know, and so that was very important. And so by God's grace, I had found this land which had been sought out for 2 millennia, for 2,000 years by many scholars and many travelers, and had been denied by many people and not understood. Many people think that Saint Matthew only gone to Nubia, and so this verified with absolute certainty that Saint Matthew, he came to Ethiopia, to northern Ethiopia, and this place is 14 kilometers from Aksum. And so I did further interviews, and with these interviews I found the palaces of the kings, the location for the palace of the kings, which are mentioned in the account of Saint Matthew, the life of Saint Matthew, and so the history became full and alive and manifest. And also the high priest, he had at the time in his hand the cross of Saint Matthew, which was Saint Matthew's staff, which had remained in Ethiopia for 2,000 years. This is the history there. So in this particular account, I would like to go into this oral history of Saint Matthew a little more. There's a number of accounts which have also recorded the life of Saint Matthew, and there are many different texts in Ethiopia which record different portions of the life of Saint Matthew. So we have this oral account. It gives the main details of what happened in the life of Saint Matthew in Ethiopia. So it says that Saint Matthew came to Ethiopia in the year AD 40. Arba Amet Meheret, in the year 40. Now, this is very important, and it agrees with, this is an indigenous Ethiopian account, but it agrees with the Latin life of Saint Matthew. In the Latin life of Saint Matthew, it doesn't explicitly say that he came in the year 40 AD, but it has a lot of chronological data and lengths of reigns and times of reigns. And when you work all these things out, you find out that Saint Matthew, according to the Latin life, actually came in the year 40 AD. If we go into church fathers like Eusebius, there, and there is different church fathers that they said that Saint Matthew left Jerusalem 8 years after the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, and then he write the gospel, leave the gospel to them in Jerusalem, and then he went to his land of evangelization. And so when we put the accounts together, we see that Saint Matthew in his life, what he did was that he left off being a tax collector, and he received the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. Then he remained in Jerusalem for 8 years. When his time to leave Jerusalem, the people of Judea asked him to write the Holy Gospel or an account of the life of the Lord for them. This became his Wingil, his Gospel of Saint Matthew. He wrote that, he left that with the faithful in Jerusalem, and then he went immediately to Ethiopia, and the history continues from there in Ethiopia, you see. And so in 40 AD, and so all the accounts, there are many witnesses that says either that he came to Ethiopia in 40 AD, or he left Jerusalem 8 years after, which if we calculate, it accounts to the same thing. There are a number of other people who also recorded the same history in Nadir before I did, but in their case, they did it independently, yes, but also same way they do it without knowledge of the Latin texts. So when I gone to Ethiopia, I already was firmly aware of the Latin text. So I gone in with full knowledge and full understanding. Where these others, their witness is very important because they came in 1 or 2 years before I did. One person was an Italian named Giano Paolo Chieri. I've had communication with him also. He's a historiographer. He write a number of books concerning different sites in Ethiopia that he visited, and he documents them in guidebooks for travelers, pilgrims, and scholars who want to come in Ethiopia and to work and to know other places and to record Ethiopian history. And so his witness in one of his books, he writes his book from Yea to Aksum. It records an account of this life of Saint Matthew, similar to my account, but with a little variation. So what I do in the paper which I presented for yourselves is that I make a comparative account and a comparative table between the different accounts that are known of that oral history. So I compare 3 accounts of the oral history. One, which is given by the Ethiopian Orthodox Patriarchate and Patriarchate and their communication with the site of the Church of Saint Matthew, which is called, generally known today as Mamhr Tzadkan, the congregation of the righteous, the 3,000 righteous Tzadkan, or it's known as Mamhr Degwe, the congregation of Degwe, or the congregation of the righteous of Degwe. Degwe is the village, Degwe or Dego, the village where the church is today. So it's in Nadir. Nadir is the region, the territory. It used to be called by that name, the city, but Degwe is the village within the city, within Nadir. So one of the accounts is by Mamhr, Father Daniel Sefer Michael from the Patriarchate. He wrote an account from and interviewed the priests there, and he recorded that in a small book, and that is also available from the church for anybody who goes there on pilgrimage. And so this is the account here in front of us, and I give a translation of it. And it is called A Brief History of the Ancient Monastery of Mamhr Tzadkan, or Gedamawi Hewit Ye Mamhr Degi Tentawi Tarik Bacheru, excuse me. So this is another account. So I've mentioned now 3 indigenous accounts. This is another one, the one by myself that I recorded, the one by Gianchari, the Italian, and then this account, which is by Mamhr, Father Daniel Sefer Michael. So he used to be head of patriarchate museums and used to work and a lecturer at Kesis Menfasawi College. So in this image here, what we see is in the small book that Mamhr, Father Sefer Mikhael, that he prepared, it has this image within the inside cover, and on the right side, it has an image of the cross of Saint Matthew. So what we find at the site of Saint Matthew, you know, it is a very full and important history, and it's, you know, every element that is necessary there for us to account for history. We have archaeological material, we have the cross of Saint Matthew, there is a baptism font which is ancient, from before the time of Christ, which was used also for baptism by Saint Matthew. There is the cross, like we said, and then there is this history. We have the palace sites, and so it's a full history. Before we is the comparative table that I mentioned, and this puts the Latin edition next to the 3 indigenous Ethiopian accounts to show that these accounts speak of the same history. And so most of these oral accounts have been written down at a recent period, but they are oral history going back very very far. And we have many other documentations going back centuries which speak of Saint Matthew in Ethiopia, and so we know we have many accounts of this history in various ways. We have king's lists, we have you know, this the oral history, we have the actual site of the church, and so there are many things for us to account for and to record concerning the life and history of Saint Matthew in Ethiopia. So there are, it is mentioned in the Gedli, in the Latin account of the Gedli Matthäus, that there were many bishops and churches that were established, and priests and deacons were established throughout the whole of Ethiopia. Now, we have many witnesses for this. So there is one document, for example, that was published by the Kesis Menfasawi College in the 50s. In the 1950s, there is one metzaf, one book, and in this account, it is written that Kudus Mateo, Saint Matthew, he came to Ethiopia, and he evangelized Ethiopia, and he preached in Adulis, it is mentioned, and also from Adulis it says that he went to Saudi Arabia and he evangelized Negran. So this is mentioned in that account. In many accounts, it mentions that Saint Matthew, different diverse accounts, it mentions that Saint Matthew, he went and he preached in Adulis. It says that he preached in Negran. In many accounts also, in indigenous accounts. It also says that he preached in Nubia. So we know in other accounts that Saint Matthew established with Kedist Hendiki, with Queen Candice, he established Zion Mariam. The church of Zion Mariam is not the first church that was established in Ethiopia, because the first church established in Ethiopia is Mamhr, which in that time was called it was called the Temple of Matthew's Resurrection. That means that Saint Matthew, he raised the king's son from the dead, or Nigisti Hendeki's son. Saint Matthew, he died, and Saint Matthew rising from the dead. There was enchanters, magicians in Ethiopia, 2 of them at that time, and Saint Matthew challenged them to try and to raise the king's son from the dead, and they couldn't raise the king's son from the dead. Just like the prophets of Baal, they couldn't, bring down the fire from heaven. And so they couldn't raise the king's son from the dead. So then after they had tried with all their chanting and everything for a good while, then Saint Matthew raised the king's son from the dead. And when he did that, all the people of Ethiopia, they believed. That's the reason why they believed, because they see this great miracle. And then when that happened, the Ethiopian the 2 enchanters, they fled Ethiopia and they went to Persia and Babylon, and they contended with the apostle Saint Simon and Saint Jude. And in the Gedli Simon et Jude, in their Simon and Jude, in their Gedalat, which is also preserved in the Latin only, their full account, and I have a study which I've done on that. And also when I was, there is an acquaintance of mine who is from Persia, and I had them, when they went to Persia the last time, to Iran, to speak to some scholars concerning the life of Saint Simon and Saint Jude. So I tried to do a lot of research in there, and I have an extensive paper about the life of Saint Simon and Saint Jude, because it's important for Ethiopian history, because it mentions in there that Saint Matthew is the apostle of Ethiopia. So it's not only in the Latin edition or it's not only in the Gedli Matthäus that it mentions in the Latin, that it mentions that Saint Matthew is the apostle of Ethiopia, but it mentioned this in also the Gedli Simon et Jude, Simon and Jude. So in the Vita Simon et Jude, so it says there more than once that Saint Matthew is the apostle of Ethiopia. And the relation that they have, it's very important, Simon and Saint Jude, because what happens is, chronologically speaking, if we talk chronologically, what we find is the life of Saint Matthew in the account which I record in this from the interview with the high priest is, and then we have in the Latin account the text of the history of Saint Matthew is in 2 parts. One is the Vita, the life. The other is the Passio, or the Passion, the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. Passio is the Latin term for the Greek word martyrdom. Okay, so in order, same way, to distinguish this life of Saint Matthew in Nadir and the Latin edition, also scholars have continued to call it, Vita and Passio, and then the other one, which speaks of a different history concerning Saint Matthew, the Acts and the martyrdom, just to distinguish them. But chronologically speaking, we have that in the life of Saint Matthew, up until the time that he baptized Nigist Hendeki husband, who is Hakapta, or his throne name is Tsenfa'ared, whose palace that I've discovered the palace of Nigist Hendeki, and in Ethiopia, in Nadir, and her husband Akapta, or Tsenfa'ared. In the Akapta is his Egyptian name, and Tsenfa'ared is his name, throne name. And so up until when they're baptized, and the whole army of Ethiopia was baptized, people from every region and tribes were baptized, by Saint Matthew. They built a church with 11,000 people, built the first church in Ethiopia, the cathedral, in 30 days. And then after they do that, it says that they raised the king's and queen's son from the dead. The enchanters, they fled Ethiopia because they were worried then. And it was said that some had said that they would burn them. And so anyway, they fled. They fled to Babylon. And in Babylon, where Simon and Jude were, the history continues. So chronologically speaking, it's very important because we know that from that, they went straight from there, straight to Babylon. And so then that history continues, okay? And then after that, there's some time passed, then the Passion comes in, the account with the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. So what we have is in the life and the martyrdom of Saint Matthew in this true account in highland Ethiopia is when they are baptized, there is a period that it doesn't mention anything, and then it goes to the end where the king who was baptized by Saint Matthew, Negist Hendeki's husband, he dies at a good old age. Then his brother usurps authority, and then it continues the martyrdom and that history. But the life of Saint Simon and Jude is in between the two. So it's a very important to study it all chronologically. But in Ethiopia, we have indigenous chronology as well, because in Ethiopia, it said that he came in 40 AD, you know, which sets the initial chronology of everything. And we know that Jandaraba, the Ethiopian eunuch, he came, according to the Ethiopian history, diverse Ethiopian history, that he came to Ethiopia in 34 AD. And Saint Matthew and the Ethiopian eunuch, they evangelized Ethiopia together, you know. When Saint Matthew first came to Nadir, he meet up with the eunuch, or the eunuch see him and meet up with him, and then Saint Matthew stayed in the Ethiopian eunuch's house, in Jandaraba house. That's where he lived, that's where he stayed, and that's where he preached. It was like the first church. Jandaraba's house was the first church in Ethiopia before the cathedral was built, because it explicitly mentions that that Jandaraba used to preach, and Saint Matthew used to preach to people in his house. And there in Italy, there are some icons that have Saint Matthew and Jandaraba in Jandaraba's house. There's some icons that are made there. So this is one of the accounts we have. Also, there are other Hawaria, there are other apostles who came to Ethiopia and who preach in Ethiopia. Principal among them is Abuna Bartholomeus, Saint Bartholomew, the apostle. He came, he is the apostle of South Arabia, which was a territory of Ethiopia at that time. And he never only preached in South Arabia, but he came to Ethiopia, and we have accounts of this Saint Bartholomew from different histories where Saint Bartholomew, he preached. Even we have from Egyptian accounts that Saint Bartholomew came to Ethiopia and preached in a number of places in Ethiopia. This is in the Egyptian Synaxarium, you know. So to say that Ethiopia has no apostle, this is very erroneous. And like I said, even from the Egyptian Coptic accounts ourselves, we can look and we can see, and there are a number of apostles which didn't just pass through Ethiopia, but were significant in Ethiopia. So Saint Matthew, he evangelized Meroe, Nubia, and Saint Bartholomew also went there and evangelized in the same places and baptized in the same places. And I have accounts and histories concerning this, and we have both Ethiopian internal and external accounts concerning Saint Bartholomew coming to Ethiopia and preaching in different various places in Ethiopia. So in essence, Saint Matthew and Saint Bartholomew, they evangelized the same area, because Saint Matthew also, same way, he gone to South Arabia, and this is the area of Saint Bartholomew, and Saint Bartholomew came to Ethiopia, which is the area of Saint Matthew. The Ethiopian eunuch, also we have accounts. The accounts are not to date. I'm not aware of indigenous accounts of Jandaraba preaching in, that it mentions him preaching. But we have from Greek accounts that he from early 4th century, we have accounts of Jandaraba that he preached in South Arabia, in the same area of evangelization of Saint Matthew and Saint Bartholomew. So they were evangelized in the same area again and again and again. And also another area of evangelization was Sri Lanka. So the bishopric, I mentioned it within the paper, that there is a number of places that we can establish that there was bishoprics and places of episcopal areas and places that were centers of Christianity and that were heavily Christianized. And these places are Nadir, Aksum, Mero, Adulis, and a number of places in Nubia, and also in South Arabia, and there is also evidence of other places which I won't mention at this time because the research is still ongoing. But there's a number of places in other parts of South Arabia or Arabia and in Ethiopia, way further south from the highlands. So yeah, we have many accounts. There is also a French writer, French scholar. He's an Egyptologist, nubiologist. His name is Mori, and he writes, as seen on the screen, the history of Ethiopia, and in 2 books. In his first book, it deals with Nubia in particular, and in his second book, it deals with highland Ethiopia. But in his first book, from Nubian accounts, from lowland Ethiopian accounts, because we have to remember as well that Ethiopia was one. Many scholars tried to divide Ethiopia, but in the words of Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian from the 5th century, he said, all Egypt is Egypt to me. And he said, all Assyria is Assyria, all Cilicia is Cilicia, you know, and in the same way, we know that all Ethiopia is Ethiopia, you know. So I read an account the other day, and it says that if the word Ethiopia really does mean them of burnt faced, men of burnt faced or dark skin, then it means all of Ethiopia, not only part, so we can't have it two ways. But of course, we know that in truth, the word Ethiopia is not of Greek origin, but it's an Egyptian word. The word Ethiopia, it is atau, and it means crown. Nevertheless, what we also find is different accounts of these magicians, and different accounts of their names. So we have from indigenous sources their names. So their names in the Latin text is these enchanters, these magicians, is Zores and Arphaxad. Zores and Arphaxad, or some manuscripts, some Latin manuscripts, it not have Arphaxad, but Arphaxar, because in the ancient Latin, in the medieval Latin philology or practice, the T and the R were very similar in certain periods, and so due to this, we get Arphaxad, Arphaxar, and in the indigenous Ethiopian account, we find they're called Zephyr and Zephyr, which I have recorded, and which Jian Chauri has recorded. Zephyr and Zephyr. This is from Na'dir. That is their name form in Ethiopic. Zephyr and Zephyr. In the Latin, Zores and Arphaxad. Now, this French scholar, which we mentioned, Maury, he, in his account, he gives also an account of their names. And in his account, he gives their name forms as Egyptian names. So he says that the first is called Sihor, and the latter is called Horsekhet. These are very Egyptian names, and of course the Ethiopian kings at that time were Egyptians, and we have, we might put we have to consider, these names, but when we consider what he has written down and what he has recorded from his sources, there is no reason really to doubt what his version of the names. And basically two of the names are dedicated to the god Horus. So in his account as well, he records the kings of Ethiopia, showing that they ruled both highland and lowland Ethiopia. So from Ethiopian kings lists, we have in highland Ethiopia, we have these kings, and in the lowland Ethiopian kings list, we have the same kings. So we know from that they ruled both upper and lower Ethiopia. And in fact, if we're going to the ancient historical period time of Ethiopia, if we go into the Nubian sources, they say that lowland Nubia was ruled by Ethiopia in, let's say, the 7th century BC. So, but these accounts are not really brought forward by many scholars who are dealing with Ethiopia. So there is a lot of things that, a lot of sources there ready for us to access and to use. The Liber Axum, or the Book of Axum, is another account. It's from the 15th century, or it has data in it from accounts from the 15th to the 7th century. In that, it mentions, it's a very important account for us, all right, because it mentions in there concerning Zion Mariam, the Church of Saint Mary of Zion, or Saint Mariam of Zion. In that account, if you go up a little, Kesis, the other way, sorry. So in that account, it says, it says here, just there, thank you. It says here in the final paragraph, it says the foundation of Kedist Mariam, Beta Christian, or cathedral now. It says the foundation was started in the year Salasa Zetin, Amet Meheret, in the year 39 AD. That church was started in the period of St. Matthew, when St. Matthew came to Ethiopia. And it was completed, it was built for a long time, and it was completed in the year 91 AD. So it was built from 39 to 91 AD, it was completed, you see. So this is the history there. So we have a number of first century churches in Ethiopia. You know, we have the church in Nadir, which was built in 40 AD, which it's still, the community is still there. And then we have Zion Mariam, which was built also in 40 AD. And and in the small book, which was prepared by Mamhr Daniel, Sefer Mikhael, he cites, I believe from the Liber Axum, he cites that the church had its foundation in 39 AD. Now, what's this difference between 39 AD and 40 AD? And we have to remember that this is like 15th century account, all right? So we're talking, you know, it's a very ancient account. And the difference between 39 and 40 AD is just, for example, if we're calculating from St. Matthew coming 8 years from the resurrection, then depending on who you are or how you work it out, you can work that out to be either 39 AD or 40 AD. So I think that's the difference in the discrepancy of the dating, where in Nadir they said 40 AD, where in Axum they say 39 AD. I think Nadir is probably more correct. Well, I believe it is correct when you look at all the sources, in fact, but that's the discrepancy, I believe. So we have a number of accounts, and there are a number of archaeological artifacts which are in Axum as well as in Nadir, okay? And one of these artifacts, I will bring in some of the archaeology, as an archaeologist myself. So in Nadir, it has an ancient stone font, which in the ancient time before Christ was used for there are, sorry, before I go ahead with that, there are also accounts, not only the book of Axum that we have from that period, from around the 15th century, 15th and 16th century, but we also have the account of the travelers, the European travelers, the Portuguese and so forth, who mention about Zion Mariam and the building of the church, and about the history of Nigisti Hendiki, how she was Christianized, and about Saint Matthew, and about the Ethiopian eunuch from, you know, from 500 years ago. So the history of Saint Matthew, you know, there's nothing to be doubted in relation to this whatsoever. We have a full history, and my books on this subject will be published soon by God's grace. So here is Alvarez. He is one of those who makes this, speaks on this issue. Balthazar Tales is another. But going back to the archaeological data, is going back to the archaeology, we have this stone font which St. Matthew baptized in. Now, the stone font is shallow, and it is only able to be used to baptize children, you know. So it was used for the children of St. Matthew, and it is shown by the ancient oral history that this is the font used by St. Matthew. No, this same font, another of this exact same font also exists in Aksum. The exact same font. The only difference with the font in Aksum is that the font in Aksum is, it has an inscription in it, where the one of St. Matthew doesn't have an inscription. And both of them are from, you know, pagan times, pre-Christian times. And they, the font in Aksum is within, the font in Aksum is, you know, within the museum. However, the font of St. Matthew is still used till today. So St. Matthew's is a living tradition. It is a living history. It is a living church. And what is important, same way, is that the cross of St. Matthew is still used today. It is still used. It's not in no museum or hidden away. But the high priest used it as his cross. The high priest in Ethiopia, who is descended from Saint Matthew in spiritual lineage, he still uses it today to bless the people, and he walks around the church compound with the cross in his hand. The cross is a 6-foot cross. Gian Paolo Chieri, when he documented, he didn't see the cross, but I've seen the cross and held it many times. And so it is made out of metal. It is 6 foot. It was his apostolic cross. And so in the document I sent for you and students, there is many documentation of all the Ethiopian sources. There are too many. Another source is Ethiopia Hezbe Tarik by Alika Taye. He mentions that St. Matthew went to Nubia, and he speaks about that. And in his Ethiopia Hezbe Tarik, he talked about the kings. So he mentioned the kings, mentioned in the account the kings who were baptized by St. Matthew. He doesn't mention they were baptized by St. Matthew, but in other kings lists, it mentions that they were baptized by St. Matthew. In the kings lists, which were published by C.F. Ray, who he asks Emperor Haile Selassie, when Emperor Haile Selassie was still crown prince of Ethiopia, he asked him for a history of the kings, and Emperor Haile Selassie gave him a king's list, and so he published that in his book, which is entitled "In the Country of the Blue Nile," and in there it explicitly mentions that Saint Matthew Christianized all these kings, starting from King Hakapta. So that is an indigenous history in concerning from the government, the king's list concerning. So we have ecclesiastical data from Ethiopia. We have imperial archives from Ethiopia. We have from scholars, from manuscripts. We have archaeology of sites like the church site, the original church site where St. Matthew built his cathedral. We have palace sites. I discovered 3 palaces thus far in the same area in the heart of the old city of Na'adir. And where the old city of Na'adir was, the heart of it is about 20-25 minutes from where the church was established, the original church of St. Matthew. We have the cross of St. Matthew, we have the stone fonts. Yeah, there is it's a very rich history.
Thank you so much, Deacon Gabra. We appreciate your research and your presentation. Maybe students may have some questions. So now the floor is open. If you have any question, you can ask. Before that, our focus is we learned a lot about Saint Matthew. We get 5 apostles came Ethiopia, but more Saint Matthew stayed in Ethiopia. And we heard Mamhr Degoe and Mamhr Tzadkan. That place is around Aksum, maybe 12 or 15 kilometers from Aksum. So that was, we have the traditional association, Tsewa Mamhr, so established there. Jesus Christ was one of the members in Mamhr Dego. We have
yes. I mean, I could, if we have a time, then perhaps we can, go into that tariq a little, because it's very important, because Saint Matthew is not the only history, and the Hawariyat Zaman, the time of the apostles, is not the only tariq that is neglected or has been usurped by Egyptian history, Coptic history, which has taken over the indigenous Ethiopian history, or usurped it, which is the correct term, really. So we have also the history of the Tzadkan. We talk about the 9 saints all the time, okay? But the 9 saints, they came very late. They were 5th, 6th century, or very late.
Yeah, of course, the 9th century, they came late.
The 9 saints, saints. They came very late. Yeah.
But
the Tzadkan, they came in the 4th century. But if we have time, we can go into that.
Yeah. When we focus on the life of Saint Matthew, we have tradition. We know Saint Matthew was came to Ethiopia and serving around Aksum and other places. So maybe some students may have a question. Especially, we can focus how was the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. You already mentioned. Maybe they have this question, because in our tradition, there is no massacre in Ethiopia, especially for the apostle. No martyrdom in Ethiopia, especially for the apostle. So how Ethiopian martyred Saint Matthew? This is the main focus. We have a tradition. Yes, of course, he came in Ethiopia. Let's focus.
Would you like me to elaborate on that?
In the martyrdom of Saint Matthew, you can elaborate there.
Okay. Well,
before that, I'm so sorry. Do you have any question? You can ask. Let's give a chance.
Amen.
They have question. Okay, nobody came to ask. Okay, let's focus on the martyrdom of Saint Matthew.
Yes. Okay. Yes, it's correct. As we mentioned, there were Saint Matthew. He came to Ethiopia. The people, they were converted. The king, the queen, the whole army were converted. The whole army were converted, and it was the king, the queen, his son, and his daughter. This was the imperial family, and so all were baptized. Even the king's brother was baptized. It doesn't specifically mention that, but it indicates that in the martyrdom of Saint Matthew, or the Passion, that the dignitaries were baptized. In fact, there is an account also, there is another account by Mary Ras Aman Balai, and we know that his texts are very difficult to deal with. He writes a lot of accounts, but they need to be studied very scholastically, because they are like, how I treat them, they're raw documents, and they're not to be taken alone by themselves, but they're to be studied very deeply and to be deciphered in some regards and translated and contextualized. But he also records an account of the Gedli Matthäus. So he records so apart from the oral history and these texts that have little portions of the life of Saint Matthew in Ethiopia, like from the King's List and everything, same way we do have that text of his in his Metzafer Berhit, and in there it has the account of the life of Saint Matthew. It is a little confused in some places, but it is either it is the Gedalat, the life of Saint Matthew, or it is coming directly from the Royal Chronicle, which chronicles Saint Matthew. But it's an authentic text. It is mentioned also by Mamhr, Father Daniel Sefer Mikhail, in his brief history of Mahabharat Adkan. He rightly mentions it. And so in there, it mentions that also it mentions that the king and the queen and their children and the whole army were baptized. This is why I want to mention it. So it mentions both in the Latin and in that account that the whole army were baptized, because that's a significant point. Because when you go into the mysteries also of the life of Saint Matthew, which I am writing a book about the prophecies or the foreshadowing of the history of Saint Matthew in the Old Testament, then you find that this actual history is very important. But going back to the martyrdom of Saint Matthew, now all Ethiopia received Christianity and baptism from the hand of Saint Matthew. So they received this without martyrdom. So we can say truly that Ethiopia received Christianity without martyrdom. Also, we have the account in the Acts of the Apostles of Jandaraba, the Ethiopian eunuch. He received Christianity. They preached for many years, and Saint Matthew was in Ethiopia for 23 years preaching before he was martyred. 23 years. So you can, so this collective memory and history of Ethiopia that is come down through the generations, that Ethiopia didn't receive Christianity through martyrdom, is correct, because for 23 years, they had received, they had Saint Matthew as their apostle, as their patriarch, the see of Saint Matthew in Ethiopia. His seat was there, just like the seat of Moses. And so it wasn't until the year 63 AD, Silsasost, Amet Meheret, that was the year that Saint Matthew was martyred. We know this was the year that Saint Matthew was martyred because it explicitly mentions this in the Latin version, Latin edition of the life of Saint Matthew. And this Latin edition, just to reiterate, it wasn't originally written right in Latin. It was originally right in Aramaic, in Babylon, Aramaic or Hebrew, in Babylon, by the Bishop of Babylon, whose name was Abdias. And he was anointed to be Archbishop of Babylon by the apostles Saint Simon and Jude. So those two magicians, he contended with them, this bishop as well as Simon and Jude. And so it is him who writes that Saint Matthew is the apostle of Ethiopia a number of times, and him who writes and compiles these 10 books of the apostles' lives. And
Deacon Gabra Xavier,
yes.
following question.
Yes, sure.
Magdas asked, she wrote, if Saint Matthew came and evangelized in Ethiopia, then why did we go to the Church of Alexandria for succession?
Yeah. This is a completely separate lecture.
Yeah,
but yeah, we can touch on it, of course. Yeah. So in the 4th century, we'd had Christianity for 300, 400 years already before we had this kind of communication with Alexandria or with Athanasius, Saint Athanasius, Patriarch Athanasius of Egypt. Like we mentioned, we had many apostles came to Ethiopia. Saint Bartholomew, the principal ones, Saint Matthew, Saint Bartholomew, and Saint Andrew. They are the principal ones, not to mention Jandaraba. So our Kadasi, our liturgy is so different, and our Christianity, indigenous Christianity, is so different from the Egyptians because we had Christianity before the Egyptians. We had monasticism before the Egyptians. Monasticism in Ethiopia began with the daughter of Nigiste Hendiki, with Queen Candace, from the Acts of the mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 8, verse 20, from verse 26. Her daughter was the first monk anointed by Saint Matthew. This is explicitly mentioned in the Gedli Matthäus, in the life of Saint Matthew. And so we had monasticism 400 years before Egypt. We had Christianity. Saint Mark, the second evangelist, he came to Egypt the first time, a decade or so after Saint Matthew had already evangelized Ethiopia. And so in the time of Fremenatos, we have to study this history. There is a confusion with Rufinos and the understanding with the texts of the church father or ecclesiastical writer Rufinos. In fact, Rufinos mentions that Saint Matthew came to Ethiopia. Rufinos mentions this, but it is overlooked and ignored. And also it is said that this refers to Nubia. Okay, and even Rufinos himself thinks that it refers to Nubia. So he himself was confused because he was writing, but he had never been to Ethiopia himself. So he didn't completely understand the geography of Ethiopia. But in his account, he says that Saint Matthew evangelized Ethiopia, and then he says, Rufinos, that he speaks about Fremenatos. And actually, if you study the histories of different writers, ecclesiastical writers, even Nestorians or Arians, if you study their different writings, then apparently Ethiopia was evangelized from the start many times over and over again. So many writers were confused about the history of Ethiopia. And so we can, if we want, we can get many, there is one writer after the time of, I believe his name is, he speaks about Theophilus, I believe, if I'm correct about that. Anyway, that Ethiopia was re-evangelized again. And it speaks about also, some writers speak about, in that same case as well, about South Arabia just being evangelized in the 4th century. So, but we know, we have many writings that South Arabia was evangelized in the 1st century, again in the 2nd century. Teachers went there and so forth. So, but to try and close on that question is that it is partly due to confusion in Rufinos, But again, Rufinus himself, when he says St. Matthew evangelized Ethiopia, he take that knowledge, that text is coming from within the Latin edition of the life of St. Matthew. And I have a paper on that, which evidences that he was using the Latin life of St. Matthew in order to make that statement. So it's talking about Nadir that he evangelized there. And so he's just confused that says St. Matthew evangelized one part of Ethiopia and Freminatos another. No, it's talking about the same history and it's in the same chapter.
Okay.
Yeah. So
thank you so much.
And then again, Egypt themselves, last point, sorry, Egypt themselves, they tried to usurp authority over Ethiopia unjustly, unrighteously. And if we study the history, just in this last point, if we study the history of Egypt, especially in the 4th century, there was a lot of turmoil concerning bishops and bishoprics, and there is a lot of documentation for our, which works for us, which says that, in fact, in Egypt, one bishop wasn't allowed to go into another bishop's area, even within Egypt. So Egypt had no authority to come into Ethiopia or have usurp authority over Ethiopia at all. And another point is that Egypt was part of the Roman Empire. Ethiopia wasn't part of the Roman Empire. Ethiopia was its own empire. Some of the great empires of the world, it was Persia, Ethiopia, and Rome. Yeah, so they were complete separate entities.
Thank you so much. One more question.
I saw there was a written question also.
Yeah. Why do some writers claim that the Ethiopian Matthew evangelist is outside Africa? Some say Armenia.
Well, ordinarily it's Bartholomew that they say, Saint Bartholomew, the apostle, that was in Armenia. But the main place of evangelization of Saint Bartholomew was South Arabia, but also Ethiopia. Yeah, these were the main places of his. And you see, one issue is that there are a number of writings, and through these writings there is a number of confusions. That's where it comes about, and that's why it's necessary for we to document and compile together solid history using philology, linguistics, archaeology, ecclesiology, and all the available sources to us, history and so forth.
Any more questions?
Was that area referred to as Ethiopia at any point in history? Which area? I think the question needs further elaboration. I'm not clear on it. Sorry.
Yigarmal, can you speak and tell us detail your question?
Thank you. Good evening.
Amen.
I've read in a few documents, including the Encyclopedia Britannica, the area that was referred to as Ethiopia, referring to the places St. Matthew evangelized, is not the present day Ethiopia. Rather, it's a place south of the Caspian Sea, present day, which resembles the present day Armenia. And I was wondering how much is in that, and if at any point in history that area was either a part of the Ethiopian Empire or was referred to as Ethiopia for any reason?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have really anything to speak concerning that, you know. But yeah, there are many people trying to look, you know, we have to deal with truth and history, and also ourselves as Christians and custodians to, you know, the knowledge of God and truth. We have to deal with what is true, and so you know, in the weakness of our humanity, we are presumptuous in many ways, you know, and people, they want to presume things that aren't so, you know. They were, Saint Matthew, when he preached about the, you know, the Tower of Babel, he says that they were presumptuous, those who built the tower, you know. And so and he speaks of us, how we build an earthly tower through our presumption, and we try to find our own way to heaven. So yeah, people are trying to create their own church, their own heaven, their own reality, but we have to deal with you know, what is the authentic truth, the authentic history, because, you know, the true science is true knowledge, and so there are, you know, there are many dark forces in this world, same way, which wants to destroy our history, destroy the history of the world. In fact, you know, now, you know, we are, apparently we came from apes, and the world is millions of years, you know, but we know in truth that this is diametrically opposed to the reality of history, of linguistics, of epigraphy, of, you know, the ancient tablets, the Egyptian history. You know, Egyptian history begins at the same time that the Hebrew history begins, and documentation. The same time the Babylonian, Sumerian history begins. All history testifies of itself, you know, and linguistically we can know what is the truth, and historically we can know what is the truth, and there is no history before 5,500 years, and if we, you know, because of our lack of knowledge, that we understand that God created the world, or to the contrary, that he didn't, and we came just through chance, you know, and millions of years. If we don't really understand this millions of years, and if we're not careful, of course, through our lack of knowledge, we can perish in this kind of knowledge, but one is opposed to the other. We have so much knowledge and so much history concerning the world, concerning, like I said, archaeology, historical archaeology. And when we put that against this kind of paleoarchaeology, so historical archaeology against paleoarchaeology, which deals with Lucy and all this kind of thing, we see that they're in conflict with each other. So one of them is wrong. And so we have to choose which one we want to deal with. Yeah. So in all knowledge, we have to look for what is true, and this is what we're trying to do today in the knowledge of Saint Matthew. I hope that kind of answers your question in one way or another.
Okay, Deacon Gabra, Xavier, thank you so much for giving this wonderful presentation. Every time you are willing to give us a lecture, your researches, we may see you again. Thank you so much. We may finish now. As Yohannes will conclude the sessions. So we appreciate it. If you have any...
There was one question about the paper.
Okay.
That's one Diacon, he requested it.
Okay.
So,
Is it possible for us to read the paper? If you they need the paper that
they request you speak to Kesis. Kesis, he have.
yes. I'll share to them.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
እልክላችኋለሁ እኔ ጋር አለ። ቀሲስ ዮሐንስ
ያው እርሶ ይጨርሱት ግድ የለም
ዘወጠነ ይፈጽም ነው
ግድ የለም
ይባሉ ግድ የለም ይባሉ።
እሺ አስተማረን የመከረን አምላካችን ስሙ የተመሰገነ ይሁን። እንደዚሁም ደግሞ የቅዱስ ማቴዎስን ሕይወት ታሪክ በሚገባ የለፋበትን ላካፈለን ወንድማችን ገብረ እግዚአብሔር ነው። ገብረ እግዚአብሔር አምላካችን የቅዱስ ማቴዎስን በረከት ያሳድርብህ። የኛም የሰማነውን በልቦናችን አሳድሮ መልካሙን ፍሬ እንድናፈራ እግዚአብሔር ይርዳን። ለሳምንት በሰላም ያድርሰን። አቡነ ዘበሰማያት
አቡነ ዘበሰማያት ይቀደስ ስምከ
ኢየሱስ ክርስቶስ ኃጢአት ያወጣት ሁሉ ከማይሰራ ኃጢአት እግዚአብሔር ይፍታን። ኃጢአት ያሰማልን
ኃጢአት ያሰማልን።
ጾማቸገን አሜን። አብሮ ያሰማን።
ኃጢአት ያሰማልን።
አሜን አሜን።
ኃጢአት ያሰማልን። ደህና ደሩ።
አሜን። ደህና ደሩ።